So, my name is Tara Kane, and I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And I was asked to come today to talk a little bit about de-escalating folks when they're having a really hard time. I know that that's something that I deal with in my job all the time, and it's definitely tricky. And what I would say is that I've seen the work that you guys are doing, and I've just kind of observed, and I can tell you that you've already really got this. And I'm just here to kind of like maybe hopefully give you some ideas, some of the things that my colleagues and I have used that have been helpful. So one of the things I think is that we all think it starts with listening, and I think it starts even a little bit before that. So I think that before you even start listening, I think you need to check in with yourself and see where you are. And if you are feeling like for whatever reason this isn't the right time for you, this isn't the right situation, if there's somebody else who can kind of be present and take over being, next to someone, then maybe that's the better idea. So I kind of feel like before the listening comes the checking in with yourself. And if there's nobody else and you've checked in with yourself and you're feeling pretty stressed out, then I think you need to do some breathing and, kind of grounding yourself. So I feel like those are the most important things. And then is the listening. So sorry. Okay. So with listening, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? You're just gonna you want to be, I think it's really important to be sitting either at the level that somebody's at or underneath. If there's a way to get lower, then get lower. You want to be as non-threatening as possible, and you're just sitting and listening. And I think during that time, you want to be sure you're not even jumping in with any ideas or thoughts about how you can fix it, how you can change it. I don't know if you guys can relate, but I can definitely relate. When I've been really angry, the last thing I want is somebody to jump in and tell me, oh, here's what we can do about it, right? So usually when we're talking to people and they're in that space, it's just like when you're in that space. And so trying really hard to hold back, even if you're like, oh, the answer is simple, I can give it to you right now, just kind of holding back and not doing that. So and so then I think that after the listening, you want to really check in and make sure you've understood what they've said. So for some people, like if you're talking about somebody who's in the middle of a psychosis, checking in and making sure you've heard what they said may not be an option. They may just want to keep going. And so sometimes listening and checking in over and over again is as far as you're going to get. But that means a lot, just to sit and to listen and to take on the pain a little bit, and just to, keep checking in with yourself to make sure that if you are having those feelings coming up, that you're regrounding. One of the things people talk about is using breathing exercises for clients or people when they're, in trouble, when they're having a hard time. And I think that certainly that works for some people. For me, I've never had a time where it was really all that effective for somebody else. For me to sit there and say, here, let's breathe, let's do this, right? Because again, you're taking over their space. So what I find is that breathing exercises are great for you. You know what I mean? If you're in the space where you can do them, great. And I think that will help the person who you're trying to help. But I often won't go ahead and just say, sit down and do box breathing with me or something. I think usually when people are in crisis, they're not able to really hear that. So a couple of things just for mental health situations. So if you're with somebody who's having any kind of a psychotic episode, whether that's schizophrenia or bipolar, or whether that's related to meth-induced psychosis, whatever it is, if somebody's in a psychotic state, don't ever try and argue with somebody. You know what I mean? Obviously, right? But not even pointing out discrepancies. Not, I think that sometimes we feel like, oh, but this person is so off base, and I can just tell you that obviously it's never going to work. So as much as you believe you have, two eyes or you have hair, that is how much they believe whatever it is that they're telling you. And you have to kind of be there with them. And I think, imagine what it would be like to sit in their situation where they would feel that way. And if you can't say honestly, that must be really scary. I can see how that would be really scary. Don't say it. If you can't say anything honestly, if it's not coming from you and your heart, don't say it, because obviously people feel disingenuous, just disingenuousness. So I think that's really important. So saying, like, you don't have to agree, right, with what they're saying. You just have to, like, so you don't have to say, yes, I see that dragon, but you can say, that sounds really scary, right? Those kinds of things. And just constantly recognizing that whatever is going on is very real to them. And again, sometimes with people who are in the middle of a psychosis, it's the listening, the checking in over and over again. So not trying to fix. And a word about PTSD. So I think that honestly, the amount of people that trauma has touched is outrageous. And so the importance of recognizing, I don't know if you remember when HIV became a thing and everybody said, just assume that everybody's blood is contaminated. Just assume that everybody who you're coming across has had trauma in their life, right? In the same way. It's like the universal precautions. You just want to make sure that you're acknowledging that this is a person whose life you know very little about, usually, even if you do, but to recognize that there are things you don't know about someone, and that when the trauma comes, when whatever it is, because most people with PTSD, it's like there's a tiger in the room all the time, and so one small thing, and that tiger is lunging at them, right? And so even if we can't see that, I think it's important for us to, again, imagine it and try and, kind of see where somebody's coming from. So I think that one of the important things is to also just remember to care for yourselves. I think that, again, trauma touches so many people, and so many of us who are helping are also touched by trauma. And so making sure that, you're taking care of yourself, and that after a situation, if you're, in a situation and there are others around you, check in with each other, really be there for each other, right? Because it's so incredibly important. And again, we don't know anymore, what somebody who's helping is going through than somebody who's actually in crisis. So, and it can very easily cause that vicarious trauma and kind of continue to self-perpetuate. So, so really taking care of each other and taking care of yourself, making sure that you're doing the things. I mean, we all know that self-care is important, but I think it's harder to do it, especially when you guys are out here and you're doing work that you're doing, and finding that time is really difficult, but so important. Sorry, I'm not much of a public speaker.
No, you're great. You're doing a great job.
This is awesome.
So, I would say that one of the other things, besides just the constant checking in with yourself and where you're at and the listening, is the validating. So if you do get space, if let's say you get a minute, being able to offer that space as a validation. Like, again, I hear where you're coming from. Maybe not I understand. That one can be pretty triggering for people because you may not understand at all what they're going through, right? But just taking the time to say, like, you understand why they're feeling the way that they are, and acknowledging their feelings. And what I would say, things to avoid: telling people that everything's going to be okay. Obviously, we can't guarantee that. I wish we could. Stopping someone from talking about their feelings or fears. Offering unsolicited advice about what somebody should do. Obviously, blaming anybody. I mean, I don't think any of you would do any of this, so, but invalidating or minimizing, and that's tricky, right? Because invalidating and minimizing can happen really easily without anybody intending any, without any ill will. No ultimatums, and telling somebody they're lucky that it wasn't worse. And the other one is taking over with your own feelings. So one of the things I think with self-care is sometimes when we go into these situations, if you have anything that reminds you of your life, right, it's really easy to kind of start talking about your own life. And I think that peers are amazing, and that system and that idea of telling your story can be so powerful. Not in a crisis, you know. Typically that's just not going to be helpful to somebody who's already in a crisis. And then if you can fix it after you do all this listening and checking in, if you can actually solve the problem, great, then do it. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. If there are parts that you can solve, tell them what you can do. Tell this person, you know, here's something I can do to be helpful. That's great. Focusing on the future. And let's see. So as far as like actual tools that I tend to use the most, I think that it's pretty well known right now. Food is a great one. So whatever it is that the food is that you love to be able to provide somebody, great. I would say that, like, for me, it's those instant carnation breakfast chocolate drinks. For whatever reason, I've never had anyone turn them down. It's not a problem for anyone's teeth. They've got good nutrition. You know, they're very, like, kind of soul-filling in that way. So, like, but whatever it is that you have. And then, obviously, cigarettes for anybody who is a smoker. So very helpful. The way that people process that dopamine, the way that it helps to level things out. I mean, yes, it's a stimulant, so you kind of feel like, oh, am I going to hand a stimulant to somebody who's already agitated? Yes, please. If you can do it, I recommend people carry a pack around with them so that they can do that even if you're not a smoker. And distraction, so definitely one for later on, you know. So if somebody's screaming, probably distraction's that's not the time for that. But if it's kind of coming down, and you're worried like, oh, it could escalate again, I think talking to people about one of their favorite childhood memories, talking to them about something that they're dreaming about for their future, you know, really just kind of engaging somebody in something that's completely different from what it is that's going on. But again, only if they're at a point where they're really ready to let that go. And only you, when you're with someone, can determine, like, do you feel like that's the right time to do that? And taking a walk or just movement is so important. It really is a great way of kind of like letting off some of that energy. So if you can, like, do you want it, and it also gets somebody out of the situation, out of the environment that may be, you know, kind of making things worse. So I think that one is incredibly helpful. No matter what point of crisis somebody's in, I think that you can ask them if they'd like to go on a walk. You can listen while they're walking, you can do your checking in while they're walking, but it does help to kind of dispel some of that kind of difficult energy. Making sure that you're giving people choices, and simple choices, you know, something that's like just whatever it is that you can offer them in the moment. Always letting them know that they can leave you at any moment. Like, you know, if they're done with this conversation, no, don't worry, you're not gonna hurt my feelings, right? Like, you take your space, I'll be here if you need me, come back if you want. So some of those things that can be really helpful. And as I said, I don't usually do breathing exercises with people. It's just never worked for me. And I heard a touching story recently about somebody in EMT maybe like holding someone, which I thought was a really beautiful story, but I just want to put a caution out there that touching people is incredibly risky in so many ways. You know, just the amount of damage you can cause from doing something that's a loving gesture, but touching someone when they're not ready to be touched is just, again, I can't think of a time where anybody was in crisis where touch seemed to be helpful for me. I mean, being there, giving people eye contact, you know, not intense eye contact, not scaring the shit out of them, but like being there and showing them that you're present, great. But that's, you know, that's as far as I would go. I think that touching is a beautiful thing, and I think it's really not typically a real challenge when it comes to crisis and somebody you may not know very well. So I talked to my team who goes out into the community all the time about this. I told them I was giving the talk, and they talked about some things that were helpful for them. And they added that, like, being consistent, you know, and again, that goes back to, you can walk away at any point, I'll still be here, right? Like, I'll come back, reassuring them that you're present, if you can honestly. Like, if you can honestly say, I'm going to be here, don't say it if you don't mean it. but, you know, showing up and if you say you're going to do something, following through and the importance of that. Focusing on one thing at a time. Honesty, even when the answer is like, I don't know how to help you right now. I really want to, but I don't know how to help. That's okay, right? I think that people can really respond to that. They understand at least you're trying, you know? And also, one of the things that was mentioned is solution-focused options, like talking about, like in an hour from now, if this is solved, how did it happen? You know, because sometimes people have their own answers, and you want it to be their answer, right? You don't want it to be your answer of a solution, you want it to be their answer. And so sometimes that's a good way of getting somebody to kind of work towards whatever their solution would be. And then I just wanted to hear from you guys, like, is there anything that you guys have used that has been particularly helpful, or any questions or thoughts? Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly when there's a lot of auditory hearing things that I can't hear, and I made the mistake one time of asking, "Are you hearing something?" Which didn't go over well. But is there? How can you both affirm somebody and support them when they're having like other conversations and are kind of like having multiple focuses of their, you know, they're recently talking to me, but then also fighting with something that they're hearing, and I'm never sure how to support them.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I can tell you that I guess that my response in those moments is just to do the sitting. Like, I'm going to sit near you. I'm going to, you know, if you feel like you can talk to me at some point, I'm here. But I think that trying to argue and you know, argue for time with those voices, it's not going to work. The voices are right there, right? And you're over there. So I think that, like, competing for somebody's attention when that's right in their head is very difficult. So I think, yeah, just being present in those moments, doing the checking in, listening to see if there's a way you could be helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was always my understanding that, especially maybe going kind of along with what you were saying, that especially when somebody's experiencing a psychotic break, you know, you want to support them and validate them, but you don't want to actually validate their delusion.
Right.
Right? Like, you don't want to be like, oh yeah, I see the dragon too.
Right.
Right? Would you agree, or do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, so at those moments, what I try to just stick with, because at that moment I don't really care whether they believe or don't believe that I see the dragon, and so I'm just gonna say, like, that sounds so scary, or, you know, holy shit. Whatever it is, that's just, you're acknowledging that that's where they're at, and yeah. But I think anytime you want to, like, argue with somebody about a delusion, or dispute somebody's delusion, you're going to end up walking down a path that's not going to be useful to them. Even if it's not upsetting, it's usually not useful.
I guess my thought was almost like the opposite. Like, you're not disputing. It's like, I've heard stories about people trying to help people by being like, okay, we need to get this person, like, here. Being like, okay, well, you know, they're basically using their delusions to get them to do something. And I was always that's very unhealthy, like, very bad for that individual. Essentially.
Right.
You know, you don't want to be like, oh, the CIA's following you? Well, come with me and we'll escape the CIA.
Right.
Like, you don't want to do that, right?
No, I wouldn't do that either. Okay. I mean, that sounds like manipulation.
Right.
And then you're being dishonest, right? So, like, yeah, I think, again, honesty, like, maybe being at the forefront of all of this. If you're not being honest, it's not going to work.
Are there any local non-911 services that could help? Like, I know with like our Kane, we reach out to Denver harm reduction, or Denver harm reduction? Yeah, Denver harm reduction, about better training and stuff like that. Is there anything that, like, we can reach out for if we need help in the moment?
Yeah, so the Denver crisis line, and I know that there was something sent around to me that was like a resource page. I wish I'd printed it up now. But so it showed 3 different mental health crisis options, which I wasn't aware that there were 3. I've definitely called on, you know, the Denver mental health crisis line, and that's been useful in the past. A lot of the situations that I'm in when it gets really bad, so for the most part, you know, we're managing it, but if it gets to the point where somebody's, you know, throwing a knife around, we're often in the position where we have to call police. I know that that's not an option that anybody wants, but
Just a little follow-up, is there a way to get only EMTs, or would the police
Yeah.
have to be involved?
no, you can absolutely have the EMTs. Nope. So no matter what, you can always not call the police and have the EMTs come.
Cool. I just know for some things, like if you mentioned with like an overdose, they'll send cops first thing, so that's why I wanted to ask about that, so that if there was a way
No.
to avoid getting police involved.
Absolutely, there is. So you call the non-emergency line, which is connected, but you just tell them that you don't need police. I do not need police, and they will just send the EMTs. Yep.
Are
Yeah.
you familiar with the training that area dispatches are getting, or that groups are moving toward, like Dashers moving toward training a lot of dispatch facilities? Are you familiar with that at all? That you've done it? Okay.
No. No,
Because
sorry.
no, that's something that's fairly new, actually. That for maybe the last 20 years or something, it's always been that the cops have to come on the call. And you said a very key word there that most of us don't know, because we have 911 programmed in our head. If you're in the Denver metro, or if your area has a 311 system, you can dial 311, or what a lot of people will do is they'll have their community's non-emergency phone number saved in their phone bank. The non-emergency number allows you to describe your desire for a paramedic, for a mental health crisis worker, or for a for fire crew, right? Those type of responders to come. In this day and age, most of us are like, well, I don't want to call 911, and it's Denver, Aurora, others that are working with Dasher, the Denver Alliance for Street Health response. Our agencies are learning for their dispatch centers, which are not police officers, they're not even oath takers to the Constitution in most cases, to be trained on how to not send police to a scene.
No, they do that in the emergency room, and the way that they do it is not very nice. Yeah. Because they don't call me, their provider, to say, does this person have schizophrenia? They say, oh, they had meth in their system, send them out. Yeah. And regardless, right? Like, people need care. And unfortunately, our hospitals have decided that they don't want to care for people who have drug-induced psychosis. So that's really, really unfortunate. Yeah. And so instead they end up in jail, right? Yeah. Very sad. Any other questions, thoughts, suggestions? No? Okay. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening. And thanks for doing everything you guys do. Seriously, you are all doing amazing things.
Thank you.